Folks, does hearing the words contingency funds and financial planning fill you with fear and nervous sweats? Do you start to dread just thinking about money? Well, worry no further. I'm here to take away all your stress. Hi, I'm Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and this is the Investverse Podcast and Investor Education Initiative by HDFC Mutual Fund. On today's episode, I'll be talking to Varun Duggirala, a man of many talents. Varun is an entrepreneur at heart who started his own company called The Glitch. He's also the host of a podcast called Advertising is Dead and the co host of another podcast called Think Fast. Recently, Varun has ventured into the world of content creation and has written his very own book. Everything is out of syllabus and instruction manual for life. Varun and I will be talking about his creative agency, The Glitch, contingency funds, and much more. So, without going any further, let's get into it. Varun, welcome to the show. Thanks for doing this for our listeners.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to see how this is going to go today.
Yeah, so let's start with your relationship with money, Varun, over the years. You started working at MTV all the way to becoming an entrepreneur. Fascinating. What was your relationship with money throughout?
Um, if I think back to my time at MTV, I started off as an intern with working and assisting on shows like it's a basic intern salary as they call it. I don't think you can ever call intern salary a salary, but started off with that, and then from there on, kind of went on to get a job. So then I think my first salary was 12,000 rupees. Pre TDS, and I started off with that, and over time kind of grew that. I mean, I think my salaried life went from 12,000, and over the years I worked at Channel V as well, where that I think eventually grew to about 20,000 till I quit and decided to be an entrepreneur. So I think I quit way before the salary part went up. But it was interesting, at least when I think back on that period and how really working with money was for me, because it was basically had to take care of rent, had to take care of. I don't think I had a concept of savings because there wasn't much to save or to even invest in that sense. You just have your chartered accountant tell you that these are a few things you have to do for to make sure that more tax doesn't get cut from your salary, and that's pretty much what I stuck to. But I think over the years, kind of have learned a little bit more about how to look at investments and kind of also look at money in a slightly different sense than just like something you spend.
Yeah, and then came the big jump from working to building your own organization. So, what was your experience like building the glitch?
So the glitch kind of just happened. We didn't set out to start a company. So in 2009, my co-founder Rohit and I, we were both working at Channel V. Rohit and I had studied together previously, and we were also flatmates. We decided to leave music television and start a company to create content for brands online, which wasn't really a thing in 2009. We didn't really have too many projects. We started with a few projects. I'd say core investment on the company was I borrowed some money from my parents. Rohit did the same. We also had a little bit of money we had by then saved up, which wasn't much in hindsight. And we got a few projects in. So I would say the first couple of years was us really doing a lot of production work for brands. But over time, we kind of grew an agency wing, because the more we were creating content for brands, the more we were also giving them strategy and everything else. And so eventually what became the largest part of our business was the agency part. And by the time we got acquired in 2018, we were now from the apartment back then with two of us, we were about 300 people when we got acquired in 2018 across two cities. And now we're a far larger team in that sense. We're part of a larger group over the last 4 or 5 years. But it's been interesting to kind of see and learn things, I think, at every step, because we didn't necessarily start with the business plan. We're not what you call the classical started a company with a business plan entrepreneurs. We were like, we kind of fell into it, and we figured our way out as we went through it.
What was the journey on the financial side out here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
started off without a plan, but
Yeah.
what about the financial aspect of things that you probably learned along the way, planning for a rainy day, stuff like that?
Yeah, so that's something we actually had to like. I especially had to learn because I looked after the finance side of things for the first many years. I know, and being someone who didn't really have as much knowledge on that aspect, so for me, it was really trying to figure out how to get understanding how basic accounting works, how taxes work. Eventually, brought it to a point where I think kind of built a relationship with a few of the banks to even understand how what money we had in the bank could kind of make us more money while we obviously brought in business. Have been fortunate to work with a few banks who've actually helped us with that as well. But more than anything else, just to understand how you plan contingency for a rainy day. How do you kind of work towards making sure that, if there are ups and downs in business, you still are safeguarding people's salaries, costs, etc. That's something I've actually had to learn over the years. But to say that I've not made mistakes on that front is would be me lying, because I've made many mistakes on that front through that period.
Yeah. So a contingency fund, really important when it comes to building a business. It can help business owners react to emergency situations with funding so they can at least continue with some normal operations. And contingency funds actually also provide business owners with a sense of flexibility where they can pay routine expenditures without facing any disruptions. And they're useful not only in terms of emergencies but also help in major business expenditures and stuff like replacing old equipment, upgrading technology, or acquiring any other assets. Okay, so Varun, what are some things that you learned in your journey as an entrepreneur?
I think one of my core learnings has been to kind of really separate your business from your personal finance, right? I think that's been really core. Good part is, even from the early days, I feel that we separated the money that we would kind of make and how we would invest into that versus how the business would do that. Um, and in many ways, it really helps, right? Because indexation has a benefit for holding beyond 3 years, or you can take advantage on tax reductions. You can write off business expenses, something which I unfortunately learned a little too late. You can it's a huge reason many business owners do this. I learned from people who are mentors, said, why aren't you doing this yet? And so I kind of started to follow some of these as practices, and also kind of like having like a passive income stream with with your money, especially on the side, because like I mentioned earlier, there are going to be ups and downs in business, but you got to have a certain level of financial inflow for yourself, and that really helps for an entrepreneur, especially, to have that passive income stream.
Yeah, and just revisit that. First, what Varun said was, you know, um, you take advantage of tax deductions and holding periods. Like if you hold certain instruments for more than three years, you get indexation benefits. And what Varun said about writing off business expenses, big one. You learned that late, slightly. You said that, right? I mean, splitting
Yeah.
personal and business expenditure. What was that experience like?
It's at some point you don't realize, right? You look at how you're spending money. You're looking at it. It sometimes becomes easier on both sides, which you should kind of keep separate. Is that if you want to make an expense, what is a company expense, which is versus what is yours? There are so many benefits you can have by just separating that, just from how you kind of plan it and structure it, but also when you're planning contingencies, it makes you look at, just like how you look at investments and taxation, etc., in a very different light, because there are different for on both ends. And I think that's one of the core things got to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, and from an entrepreneur's perspective, I think it's very easy for them to mix up both expenditures. So,
100%.
Varun, you spoke about a passive source of income, and that can be helpful, right? So let's talk about that.
Yeah, having a passive source of income is basically, investing through mutual funds, for instance. It really helps to have to kind of invest in mutual funds, which kind of give you that form of returns in the background, like you said. It's making money in the background. That's really helps to also kind of have some level of contingency funds for different aspects. I mean, if you like now, I'm a father. I have a daughter, so there's obviously a different kind of contingency fund I look at for her versus what I look at for future for the family versus everything else. And I think you got to bucket those up as you go along, as more and more of these things kind of come in. But mutual funds have played a big part in just how I've planned for that part, especially on the passive front.
Yeah, and because mutual funds actually help you where you can have, a mutual fund for a certain specific goal, and so you can have numerous options that cater to diverse financial goals and, of course, diverse investment horizons, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The older I grow, also one of the things I've actually learned is that it's kind of hard to be an entrepreneur and a parent, because it's been like 5 years since we had our daughter. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to manage financial stress on that front better.
And believe me, when you're an entrepreneur and a parent, there's
Yes.
already stress on your hands. So, well, I kind of identify with that. I've got a 14-year-old myself, and being a freelancer, there's all sorts of situations that you have to deal with. I'm sure you also identify with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, here are some thoughts, Varun, and for our listeners, of course, of course, nothing like having a sound financial plan. That's the first, it's the starting point. Have a sound financial plan. Then comes selection. You need to select the appropriate investment products as per your risk appetite, right? Your risk appetite, your
Mm,
financial goals, and your investment horizon. And it's a good, it's a good idea to have a financial advisor.
mm,
That guy can really help you out here. Then be patient with your investment. That is a prerequisite. Just avoid a knee-jerk approach that's based on market developments and this is happening, therefore I should do this. Avoid
yeah.
having that reactive knee-jerk approach. Um, like a financial plan, you should have a financial budget. That avoids impulse buying, and we know how powerful impulse buying can get.
Yeah.
Of course, track your actual expenditures to see where you stand versus what you've budgeted, and that's the way that you can actually cut down your spending. You start a new month, you've got a certain budget in mind, and then you track, spend an actual amount, track how does the actual stand versus the budget, and then that can actually help you cut down your spending. um I'm not such a big fan of the DIY approach. I really
Mm,
prefer to take the help of an advisor, professional.
yeah.
This is practically, at some point of time in the future, it gets a little bit tough to keep a tab on your portfolio on a daily basis, even if you have the knowledge to manage one's portfolio, right? A trusted financial advisor, on the other hand, this guy or woman can not only help you devise that financial plan, but ensure that you actually stick to it, because making a financial plan is pointless if you don't stick to it, right? That's what
Yeah.
the financial advisor can help you, can also guide you with appropriate investment decisions during tough times, and we all know how volatile the markets can get. Mutual funds definitely over direct stocks. Stock markets, financial markets are really dynamic, and investing in direct stocks without, okay, remember, without sound knowledge and proper research can actually be detrimental to one's portfolio. You don't really know what you're investing in unless you do sound knowledge. You have sound knowledge and you do your research. Then have a disciplined approach to investing. And the SIP is one of the best ways to do this, the systematic investment plan. So you take the SIP route in mutual funds, and that can actually help you stay disciplined when it comes to investing and benefit from what's called as rupee cost averaging, which is,
Mm,
you're buying units. You buy more units at a lower NAV, and you buy lower units at a higher NAV. That's rupee cost averaging in simple words. I avoid fads like cryptos. God knows I don't understand them. So I
yeah.
avoid that. Diversify. Diversification among various asset classes, because different asset classes outperform each other at different points of time. So it makes sense to have, to diversify your investments instead of putting all your eggs into one basket. So yeah, that's what I say are the tips, and that's what I would tell my listeners. So Varun, how was planning for the future in terms of finance? That's, in terms of money, how has that changed now that you're an entrepreneur and a parent?
Um, having a child is a big responsibility, right? It involves so many aspects. I would say, not just financial, but I think your entire the way you kind of life functions kind of changes entirely. But one of the core things which I know that we did plan for and I focused on is to really plan for education, right? Want to make sure that that fund is really secure in there. So and as education costs kind of go high, you got to make sure there's you account for inflation on that front and you saved it with that mindset. And really starting early. I remember that started saving very early, even much before her daughter was born, and also like look at some level of financial planning and focus, because you're doing it for another person, you're doing it for yourself in that sense. And so the earlier you start, the longer your money goes, going to stay invested, and kind of helps it grow more in the long term as well. um, I actually want to ask you as well, expert's perspective, any suggestions when it comes to planning for the future
And
as a parent?
parenting is really tough, huh? And upon that, you put you put financial planning for the goal. Yeah, that's well, actually, there are products out there that make your life easier as a parent, and in mutual funds especially, right? You've got something called solution-oriented funds, right? You can One example is a children's gift fund,
Hmm.
and you set aside a certain amount in these funds, and mentally it just lifts a burden off your head, right? Because you've put that money aside and you have actually committed that amount of money for your child's higher education costs. So I think that is, these solution oriented funds can actually help you there, Varun. You might want to have a look at that.
I definitely will.
Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks, Varun. Thanks for coming to the show. And folks, that concludes this episode. We're hoping that the listeners learned something from this really engaging conversation and hope they are looking forward to future episodes. Varun, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.